Good morning, Chairwoman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Blunt, members of the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. My name is Damon Hewitt, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As I begin, I want to lift up the victims of the massacre in Buffalo, New York, who were killed this weekend. They were killed by a white supremacist who drove 3 hours to deliberately hunt down and kill explicitly black people who were shopping for groceries. As we learn more about that killer's terroristic attack, the deadliest mass shooting in America this year, we know that it was fueled by lies, misinformation, and disinformation. And that makes it in many ways parallel to what we're seeing in the election and voting context. I'm here to warn you of another effect of these lies: the rapid deterioration of our democracy and unprecedented threats of violence and intimidation against election officials, black communities, and other communities of color all around this country. As president of the Lawyers Committee, I lead an organization that uses legal advocacy to ensure that we fight for racial justice. We fight inside the courts, outside the courts, but we fight to ensure that black people and other people of color among every American has the voice, opportunity, and power to make the great promises of our democracy real and not illusory. As part of that work, we convened the Election Protection Coalition, the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection effort, and the 866 Our Vote hotline, voter assistance hotline, which is also nonpartisan. Through that hotline, hundreds of thousands of voters call for information and assistance and to report problems in election administration, including problems with paper ballots, problems with mail-in ballots, and even intimidation at the polls or even online or through the airwaves. Our work gives us unique insights into patterns at the state and local level. Too often, what we are seeing is the erosion of election infrastructure and the democratic process, all based upon fallacies and misrepresentations and lies designed to divide us. My message for this committee is simple: election laws that perpetuate attacks and harassment and impose criminal penalties or hefty fines on election administrators just trying to do their jobs are wrong. Voting laws and practices that impose unnecessary hurdles on voters, especially voters of color, in order to exercise their fundamental rights are also wrong. This is a vicious cycle. Undermining and harassing election workers also harms voters, and making it harder for voters to cast a ballot harms election workers by making their already difficult jobs that much harder, especially in this context of the last few years. What we learned in 2020 is that democracy works when you let it. We saw incredible energy and participation across party lines. Yet legislatures have now introduced and enacted a wave of restrictive voting bills, ironically in response to those record levels of participation. Throughout the 2021 year and beginning of this year, we have seen bills that are banning drop boxes, restricting early voting hours, shortening the window to request absentee ballots, threatening new criminal and financial penalties against election administrators, and privileging partisan poll watchers, granting them sometimes unfettered access to the polls. Now, many of these laws were passed in spite of universal, bipartisan opposition from election administrators around the country, who warned legislators that the laws would have a chilling effect on election workers themselves and ultimately make it harder for voters to cast a ballot. In many instances, sadly, state lawmakers failed to heed the election administrators' warnings, and the impacts of these changes will come to light during this year's primary and midterm elections. In fact, in some states, they already have. These egregious laws are doing a number of things. They are heightening levels of racial discrimination, creating an environment rife with it. They are weaponizing the power of criminal law to sweep aside neutral and nonpartisan election administrators, functionally disenfranchising voters in the process. Furthermore, they are giving those who want to sow violence, doubt, and misdirection in the election process, is giving them political camouflage for their threats and their attacks. Put simply, these laws undermine our democracy and its promise. This week marks the 65th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous speech, "Give Us the Ballot," where he warned us about those who gain prominence and power by the dissemination of false ideas and deliberately appealing to the deepest hate responses within the human mind. Dr. King reminded us that while these individuals by no means represent the majority of Americans, the false ideas they spread often grow louder when those who disagree with them remain silent because of fear of political or economic reprisals. I said earlier that democracy is a promise. Democracy is also a choice. We have a choice when it comes to election administration. We can either strengthen democracy and make it easier to vote and administer elections, or we can make it harder. As policymakers, you can make a choice in favor of democracy. During these unprecedented times, I urge this committee and the full Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body, to not just speak out loudly against the misinformation and lies, but to stop it in its tracks through legislation and any means that you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hewitt.